My name is Claire Donovan. I am 26 years old. I found the envelope on a quiet Tuesday afternoon while I was cleaning out the bottom drawer of my dresser in my small apartment in Ithaca, New York. The drawer had become a catch-all for things I meant to sort. Later old receipts, expired coupons, a few birthday cards I never threw away. The envelope was tucked behind a stack of old utility bills. It was plain no return address, just my name written in my father's neat handwriting. I almost set it aside without opening it. Then I saw the date on the back, written in pencil 5 years earlier. Inside were 4 photographs and one short note. The photos were from the annual family gathering at the coastal cottage in North Carolina. I recognized the wooden porch railing and the way the light hit the water in the late afternoon. I was not in any of them. In one shot, I could see the edge of a blanket on the sand where someone had been sitting, but the person had been cropped out or had never been included in the frame. Another showed my father and my stepmother standing with a group of people I didn't know, all of them smiling at the camera. No empty space where I should have been. Just the picture as it was without me. The note was short. Claire, we decided it would be easier this year if you didn't come down. The cottage fills up fast, and Linda has family visiting too. We'll send pictures. Love, Dad. I sat on the floor with the photos spread across my lap. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the old radiator. I had been 21 when that note was written. I remembered calling my father that October to ask about the dates for the gathering. He had sounded distracted on the phone. He said something about how it might be better to skip it that year, that things were complicated with everyone's schedules. I had told myself it was just 1 year, that maybe I was reading too much into it. But it wasn't just 1 year. If you've ever found something small that made you realize you had been slowly written out of a story you thought you belonged in, I hope you'll stay with me. This is what happened when I finally stopped pretending the erasures didn't matter. The pattern had been there for a long time, quiet and consistent. Small choices that added up. Phone calls on Thanksgiving that ended after 5 minutes because dinner was about to start, and Linda's relatives were already at the table. Birthday dinners I found out about after the fact from a photo posted online. 1 year, I bought a train ticket in advance for the gathering, thinking I would surprise them by showing up. 2 days before I was supposed to leave, my father called. He said Linda thought it would be less stressful if I didn't make the trip. The cottage is small, he told me. We don't want anyone feeling crowded. I canceled the ticket and put the gift I had bought for him in the back of my closet. I never mentioned it again. I tried to be understanding. Blended families take work. My father had remarried when I was 14, and Linda had her own children and her own history. I told myself I was the one who needed to make space. I stayed composed when friends asked about my family. I smiled when my stepmother posted pictures from the cottage with captions like, "Another perfect weekend with the people who matter most." I never commented. I never asked why I wasn't in the pictures. I just kept showing up when they invited me and staying quiet when they didn't. But the quiet hurt more than I let myself admit. There was the Christmas I spent alone in my first apartment after college. I had asked if I could come to the cottage for even one night. My father said the rental was already at capacity. Later, I saw the photos. There were empty chairs at the dinner table, room on the couch, space that could have been mine. I spent that Christmas eating takeout and telling myself it was fine, that I was an adult now, that I didn't need to be included in every family thing. I kept that version of myself for years, the one who didn't make waves, who accepted the explanations, who believed that if I stayed small and easy, maybe one day there would be room again. It was easier than facing what the photos and the notes were actually saying. My father and my stepmother had built a version of family that worked better without me in it. They protected that version carefully. They told other people I was busy, or that I preferred to keep to myself, or that I had my own life in Ithaca now. The story they told kept their picture perfect. It just left me standing outside the frame. Brooke texted me 2 days after I found the envelope. She was my stepmother's niece from her first marriage, the one person on that side of the family who still reached out without being asked. The gathering at the cottage is in 3 weeks. I'm driving down from Syracuse. Want to come with me? Emma's excited to see you. She said she has something to show you. Emma was Brooke's younger sister, 13 years old, and quiet, in the way kids are when they notice more than they say. I hadn't seen her in almost a year. The fact that Brooke was inviting me, that Emma wanted to see me, felt like a small crack in the wall I had been walking around for so long. I didn't tell Brooke about the envelope. I didn't tell her about the note or the cropped photos or the years of short phone calls and last minute cancellations. I just wrote back that I would come. I bought the train ticket south. I packed the same small bag I always took when I tried to step back into that world. I told myself this time I would not expect anything. I would just go be there and see what the myth looked like up close. On the train, I kept the envelope in my bag. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. I already knew what it said. I watched the landscape change from the hills around Ithaca to the flatter stretches further south. I thought about all the times I had made myself smaller so the family picture could stay clean. I thought about how tired I was of pretending the erasures were accidents. I still went. I still hoped in some quiet corner I hadn't managed to close off that maybe this year would be the one where the myth finally made room for me. It wasn't. The train pulled into the small station near the coast in the late afternoon. I took a rideshare the rest of the way, watching the flat stretches of marshland give way to the low dunes and scattered houses. When the car stopped in front of the cottage, Brooke was already on the porch with Emma beside her. Emma waved with both hands the second she saw me. Brooke stepped down and pulled me into a quick hug. "I'm glad you came," she said. "Emma's been asking about you since we got here yesterday." Emma stayed close to her sister's side but smiled at me. "The water's cold, but the sun's still warm enough for the beach," she said. "You should come down with us later." I thanked them and carried my bag inside. My father was in the kitchen unpacking a cooler of groceries. He looked up when I stepped through the doorway. "Claire," he said, his voice even and careful the way it always got when he was measuring what came next. "You made it. We weren't sure the timing would work out with your work schedule." My stepmother came out from the back hallway. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and gave me the same polite smile she used for people she was obligated to greet. "We put you in the small room at the end of the hall," she said. "It's quieter back there, less foot traffic." That was the first cut of the weekend, delivered without raised voices or obvious anger. Just a room assignment that placed me where I would be least likely to interrupt the version of the gathering they wanted to keep. I set my bag on the narrow bed and left the old envelope on the nightstand. I didn't open it again. I already knew what was inside. I changed into a clean shirt and went back out to the porch where the long table was already set for dinner. My father sat at the head. My stepmother sat to his right. Brooke and Emma took the seats across from me. Two chairs at the far end stayed empty even though there was plenty of room. Conversation moved around the table in easy loops plans for kayaking in the morning, a group walk at sunset, someone's new job, someone else's upcoming vacation. When the topic turned to the big family photo they always took on, the last evening my father glanced at me and said, "Claire, you might want to sit that one out this year. Linda's brother and his kids are driving in tomorrow, and we're trying to keep the group small so no one feels overwhelmed." I nodded. I said it sounded fine. I stayed composed the way I had trained myself to stay composed for years, but the old quiet ache started low in my chest and stayed there through the rest of the meal. After dinner, I helped clear plates, even though no one asked me to. My stepmother directed the cleanup with the same calm efficiency she used for everything. She asked Brooke and Emma to move the extra chairs to the storage shed. She didn't ask me. When I offered anyway, she said, "We've got it covered. You should go rest. The drive was long." I went back to the small room instead. The window faced the side yard instead of the water. I could hear the others laughing on the porch, the low murmur of my father's voice mixing with my stepmother's. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the envelope on the nightstand. 5 years of the same pattern sat inside that bent paper. I had spent those years telling myself I was being too sensitive, that blended families were always complicated, that if I stayed quiet and easy, they would eventually make space again. They never had. Emma found me on the side porch an hour later. She was holding her tablet against her chest like she wasn't sure she should be carrying it. She glanced toward the main porch where the others were still sitting, then stepped closer. "Aunt Linda has security cameras around the cottage," she said, her voice low. "She says it's for safety when the house is empty. I was messing around with the app on my tablet last night after everyone went to bed. I saw something on the kitchen camera. I think you should look." She handed me the tablet. The footage was black and white, time-stamped from the night before I arrived. The angle showed the kitchen counter and part of the dining table. My father and my stepmother stood near the sink, talking in voices that carried clearly through the small speaker. My father's voice first. "If she starts bringing up old stuff again this weekend, it ruins the whole thing for everyone. Linda's right. It's easier when we keep the group small and she stays in the background. No one has to explain why she's not in the pictures. My stepmother answered without looking up from the dishes she was drying. We worked hard to make this family what it is. We don't need her reminding everyone of the parts that didn't fit. The pictures look better when it's just us, cleaner. Emma stood very still beside me while the clip played. When it ended, she took the tablet back without saying anything else. She didn't ask me what I was going to do. She just waited, the way kids wait when they've handed an adult something heavy and don't know what comes next. I gave the tablet back to her. My hands felt cold even though the evening air was still warm. I told her thank you. I told her I needed a minute to think. She nodded once and went back inside. I walked down the narrow path to the water's edge. The tide was out. Wet sand stretched in front of me under the last of the daylight. I kept the envelope in my bag even though I didn't need to open it anymore. The footage had said the same thing the photographs and the old note had said only this time. There was no way to pretend it was an accident or a misunderstanding. They had built the version of family they wanted by deciding I was the part that complicated the picture. They said it out loud when they thought no one else was listening. And now I had heard it. I stayed at the water for a long time. I thought about getting back in the rideshare and going straight to the station. I thought about calling Brooke and telling her I was leaving. I thought about walking back into the cottage and asking my father directly why he had said those things. Every option felt too big and too small at the same time. In the end, I stayed. Not because I still hoped the myth could stretch to include me. I stayed because I needed to see what else the cameras had caught, and because walking away right then would have felt like letting them keep the clean version of the story without ever having to look at the parts they cut out. I went back to the small room. I left the door open a crack. Through the gap, I could hear my father and my stepmother talking again, their voices lower now, the same careful tone they always used when they thought the conversation was private. I didn't move closer. I didn't need to. I already knew what they were protecting. The envelope sat on the nightstand beside the bed. I didn't touch it. I lay down on top of the covers and stared at the ceiling until the cottage grew quiet around me. Somewhere down the hall, Emma's tablet was probably still holding the footage. Somewhere on the main porch, my father and my stepmother were still keeping the picture exactly the way they wanted it. I closed my eyes and tried to decide how much more of their version of family I was willing to stand inside before I stopped trying to fit. The morning after I saw the footage, I stayed. I told myself it was to give Brooke and Emma a proper goodbye. But the truth was simpler. I needed one more day inside their version of the family so I could be completely sure when I walked away. Breakfast was laid out on the long porch table again. My father and my stepmother were already there talking quietly about the kayaking plans. When I stepped outside, my father looked up and said, "Claire, the group is leaving in an hour. Linda thinks it would be better if you stayed here this morning. The inlet gets crowded, and we want to keep things simple." I sat down anyway. I poured coffee, even though no one had offered me any. My stepmother's mouth tightened for half a second before she smoothed it back into the same polite expression. "Of course," she said. "Whatever works for you." Brooke caught my eye across the table. She didn't say anything, but she slid the basket of muffins closer to me. Emma stayed close to her sister and didn't look at the adults. The small room at the end of the hall suddenly felt like the only honest space in the entire cottage. After breakfast, I found Brooke on the side path that led to the dunes. I told her about the envelope first, then about the footage Emma had shown me. I kept my voice low and even. I didn't cry. I had practiced that composure for years, and it held now when I needed it most. Brooke listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "I've seen it too. Not the cameras, but the way they talk about you when you're not here. The excuses, the way they crop you out of stories. I just didn't know how to say it without making it worse for you." I nodded. That was enough. I didn't need her to fix anything. I just needed to know I hadn't imagined the pattern. The group photo was scheduled for late afternoon, right before the light turned golden over the water. Everyone gathered on the wide porch in the clothes my stepmother had suggested for consistency. My father stood in the center with my stepmother beside him. Brooke and Emma were placed on one side. I was guided toward the far edge, almost out of the frame. My father looked at the photographer and said, "Maybe Claire can stand a little further back so the composition stays balanced." That was the moment I stopped waiting for them to make room. I stepped out of the line before the camera clicked. I walked straight to my father and my stepmother, where they stood under the string lights they had hung for the photo. My voice stayed calm. I had spent years making sure it would. "I'm leaving tonight," I said. I'm not coming back to these gatherings. I'm not going to keep trying to fit into the version of this family you've decided works best without me in it. My father's face shifted into the careful expression he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. Claire, you're overreacting. Families have to make compromises. Linda and I have worked hard to keep things peaceful here. If you would just stop bringing up old grievances every time you visit my stepmother, cut in her voice softer but sharper underneath. We've always included you when it made sense. You have your own life in Ithaca now. We didn't think you needed every single weekend. I looked at both of them. The myth they had protected for years stood between us like a finished photograph. No one was allowed to crop. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list every exclusion or every cropped photo. I simply said, "You erased me to keep the picture clean. I'm done letting you do it." Before either of them could answer, Brooke stepped forward from where the photo group was still waiting. She stood beside me so the others could hear. Her voice was quiet but steady. "She's not overreacting," Brooke said. "I've watched this for years. The way you decide who belongs in the stories and who gets left out. Claire's right to stop pretending it doesn't hurt." My father looked at Brooke like she had broken an unspoken rule. My stepmother's smile disappeared completely. No one else on the porch moved. The quiet that followed was the first honest silence I had felt at that cottage in a long time. I went back to the small room, packed my bag, and called a rideshare. Emma came to the door while I was zipping it shut. She didn't say much. She just handed me a folded piece of paper with her email address written on it and said, "You can still write to me if you want." I hugged her and told her I would. Virginia Hale, the neighbor who lived 2 houses down the lane, was outside when the car pulled up. She had always been kind in the distant way of people who see more than they say. She walked over as I loaded my bag. "Your father told me last year you didn't like coming down anymore," she said gently. "That you had your own issues and preferred to stay away. I believed him until I saw how hard you tried every time you did show up." I thanked her. I didn't correct the story they had told her. It didn't matter anymore. The ride to the station was quiet. I watched the dunes flatten into marsh again. When the train pulled north toward Ithaca, I let myself feel the full weight of what I was leaving behind. Not just the cottage weekends, the hope that one day the myth would stretch to include me. The habit of making myself smaller so their picture could stay perfect. The shared routines I had tried to protect, even when they cost me pieces of myself. In Ithaca, the apartment felt smaller and steadier than it had before I left. I put the old envelope back in the bottom drawer, not because I needed proof anymore, but because throwing it away would have felt like pretending the years hadn't happened. I made tea and sat by the window while the radiator hummed. For the first time in a long time, the silence around me didn't feel like something I was being left out of. It felt like space I had chosen. The boundaries I set that afternoon at the cottage were not dramatic. They were simple. I would not attend gatherings where my presence had to be negotiated. I would not accept explanations that treated my exclusion as a favor. I would not keep trying to earn a place in a story that required me to disappear for the story to work. My father and my stepmother did not have to change. They could keep the version of family they had built. I was simply no longer available to be cropped out of it. Brooke texted 2 days later. She said she had stayed for the rest of the weekend, but had told my father and my stepmother she wouldn't be coming back either if they couldn't acknowledge what they had done. She didn't ask me to reconcile. She just said she was sorry it had taken her so long to say something out loud. I wrote back that I was grateful she had said it at all. Then I put the phone down and let the quiet settle again. The peace that came was not loud or triumphant. It was the steady feeling of no longer carrying the weight of someone else's carefully protected myth. I still missed the idea of the family I had wanted. I still felt the absence of the routines I had once tried to protect. But I no longer felt erased inside my own life. That was enough. Real family never requires you to disappear so someone else's picture can stay clean. Boundaries are not punishment. They are the clearest way I know to say, I will not let anyone edit me out of my own story anymore. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, comment strength below and tell me what you would have done in my place. Your words matter more than you know.